Immigration debate. President Trump remains vocal as the migrant caravan heads closer to the U.S. border. Election Day countdown. 4 days remain before Americans head to the polls. We're on Capitol Hill as candidates make their last push for votes. Asia Bibi delay. The release of a Catholic woman in Pakistan is put on hold after protests add pressure on the government. And an All Souls Day visit, a look at a cemetery inside the Vatican and the deep connection for German Catholics. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, November 2nd, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. The argument over immigration amps up just days before the midterm elections. President Trump is focused on blocking a caravan of migrants from crossing the U.S. border. Tonight, he's also supporting Republican candidates with back-to-back rallies in West Virginia and Indiana. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. President Trump is trying to convince voters he will continue the crackdown on illegal immigration. As Catholic organizations stand in opposition, the president is threatening to use military force, detain migrants in tents, and change current laws. All this in the final days before the polls open.
It will be a very exciting 5 days. We're doing numerous trips to numerous great places, great states.
President Trump leaves the White House for a weekend of rallies. He keeps warning potential voters about a caravan of migrants traveling through Mexico to the U.S. border.
Some people call it an invasion. It's like an invasion.
Promising military retaliation if the migrants throw rocks at U.S. troops sent to help secure the border.
We're not going to put up with that. They want to throw rocks at our military fights back. We're going to consider it, and I told them, consider it a rifle.
Meanwhile, Ohio Governor John Kasich, a fellow Republican, is trying to calm any fears.
No, there's no imminent invasion.
Kasich says the U.S. won't allow migrants to openly cross the border, but he acknowledges people fleeing extreme violence have a legal right to apply for asylum in the U.S.
The fact is, when somebody gets to the border, and if their families were at risk of being, violence, raped or murdered or whatever, they have a right to apply.
President Trump says undocumented migrants seeking asylum will no longer be released into the U.S. as they await a court date.
We have thousands of tents. We have a lot of tents. We have a lot of everything. We're going to hold them right there. We're not letting them into our country.
He plans to sign an order next week that could lead to the large-scale detention of migrants. And with Tuesday's midterm elections looming, the president points the blame at Democrats. He also lashes out at constitutional law, saying undocumented migrants born in the U.S. don't deserve citizenship.
This crazy, lunatic policy that we can end,
Between now and Tuesday, the president will bring his message to Montana, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, Ohio, Missouri, and we will be at the president's Indiana rally Monday night before the midterms. Wyatt?
Does sound like a packed schedule. Mark, how are Catholic organizations reacting to the president's recent immigration proposals?
Well, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops says migrants seeking asylum are not committing a crime, and a scathing response from one national group advocating for migrants. The Catholic Legal Immigration Network says the administration's unprecedented efforts to intimidate migrants with military force and undermine the legal process for attaining asylum are both illegal and immoral. Wyatt?
I'm sure the debate will continue in the weeks ahead. White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. U.S. businesses ramped up hiring in October, keeping the unemployment rate at a 5-decade low, and the president is tweeting about it. He writes, "Wow, the U.S. added 250,000 jobs in October, and this was despite the hurricanes. Unemployment at 3.7%, wages up. These are incredible numbers." Adding, "Keep it up, vote Republican." Election Day in America arrives in just 4 days. Voters decide who controls the House, the Senate, and 36 governors' mansions. Our EWTN national poll finds one of the most important issues on the minds of practicing Catholics is health care. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi tells us about the candidates' closing arguments.
Democrats hope a blue wave will flood these halls of Congress, wiping out Republicans. They're targeting them on health care, including conservative Dave Bratt from Virginia.
When our congressman took a party line vote that would have canceled health insurance for thousands of Virginians, I knew I had to run.
Democrat Abigail Spanberger in 2017 stirred to action when Republican Dave Brat voted to repeal and replace Obamacare. Democrats across the country echo that focus on health care.
Health care ultimately survived by one single vote. One single vote. You think the vote matters? You think who you've got matters? There it is.
Republican Senator John McCain cast that decisive vote that killed the GOP health care bill. But Virginia Republican Dave Brat tells me right now Obamacare is a mess.
Our health care bill would have profoundly driven down health care prices. Obamacare, they're up 150%. And so we're just trying to get the word out on the basic policy issues.
According to our national poll of Catholics, 13% of those attending Mass weekly say affordable health care is the most important issue, ahead of protecting the unborn 7%, but behind immigration and the economy jobs, both 14%.
We have the hottest economy in the world. Think of it.
Republicans' closing pitch boosted by decades-low unemployment.
We've got more people employed this year than ever before in the history of our state. 8 months in a row of record low unemployment.
But this Democrat says the poor still suffer.
Washington does work great. It works fabulously if you are rich.
Political number crunchers at the Cook Political Report estimate more than 40 House races are a toss-up. Democrats only need to win 23 GOP-held seats to take the majority. Join us next week on EWTN News Nightly as we hit the campaign trail, and always follow us on Twitter. Here at the Capitol, I'm Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Thanks, Jason. And joining me now in studio is Robert Donashi, White House reporter for the Washington Examiner. Robert, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So we just heard the Democrats need about 23 seats to gain control of the House. What's your predictions as we look into the next week?
So conventional wisdom has Democrats taking back the House by about 3 to 5 seats. The Republican strategists that I've been speaking to, the Democratic strategists that I've been speaking to, typically hold that line. There is one caveat, is that many of these races, we look at Dave Brat's, we look at some in Texas, some in California, they are within the margin of error. They're within 1 to 3 percentage points. So there is a possibility, a slim possibility, but a possibility that Republicans keep maybe 4 or 5 seat majority.
Okay, so we'll continue to watch that because there are some close races, like you say. So let's turn now to the Senate. Yeah. How does it look? Do you think Republicans likely can maintain a majority?
I'm kind of with Nate Silver. I think it's probably 85% or more likely that Republicans keep the majority, and furthermore, I think they pick up 2, maybe 3 seats.
Okay, so this is kind of like what we've been predicting, which is that House could go to Democrats.
But Senate is locked in pretty much to Republicans, yeah.
Okay. Well, so since we're here in the home stretch, you know, looking at all the midterms, it almost feels in some ways like a presidential election because we got President Trump on the road. We have former President Barack Obama on the road campaigning. Mm-hmm. What do you think that impact is going to have on voters?
So first of all, I was in North Carolina on last Friday at the rally. I saw about 10,000 people there in and outside, completely energized, ready to go. I think what you saw in Texas with President Trump, if we're going to look at him first, is that he got 20,000 people out on a Tuesday, Thursday night. They waited for 36 hours. If that correlates at all to voter turnout, I think Trump is having a big effect here. On the flip side, Barack Obama still remains probably the key figure of the Democratic Party, a party that's still trying to figure out who's leading it, what their message is, and basically generally where they're going. So right now, Barack Obama is probably the best campaigner that they have. He's already proving to pack houses. His actual effect, though, we'll have to see how that comes out here in a few days.
28 million Americans have already cast their ballots nationwide. We're talking absentee early voting this year. Mm-hmm. You'd mentioned Texas. That's where I'm going to be heading to cover this. Early voting there is pretty high. What do you think accounts for this surge in it? Is it sending out an early message, or what is it?
Well, so I think the economy is doing well. I think also that the president is touching on the issue that pretty much Republican voters care about the most, which is immigration. If you poll them within number 1 or number 2, immigration plays out as a huge factor. Mm-hmm. And you see it in Texas, right? The president talked about the 14th Amendment last week. That was like a little contentious. Everybody was nervous about what it would do. You look at Republicans nationwide, 52% of them support that. In Texas, 66% of them support that in terms of Republican voters. They support building the wall. They support immigration. They like where the economy is going. They like generally President Donald Trump's message. So, yeah, I mean, if that holds, I think we'll...
And I'm guessing traditionally the Republicans turn out for the early vote.
Well, they do, always. far more than Democrats typically do. And also, the Democratic Party has a lot of young people. Young people don't always turn out to vote. They're very enthusiastic on social media. They're very enthusiastic maybe on the street, but that doesn't always correlate for them actually getting out to the ballot box.
Okay, we'll be watching to see how many of them show up on Election Day itself. Robert Dinashi, White House reporter for the Washington Examiner. Thanks so much for your analysis.
Thanks for having me.
Facebook says the company accidentally removed a pro-life ad supporting Senate nominee Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee. The nonprofit Susan B. Anthony List claimed yesterday that Facebook was censoring its ad. The 30-second clip raised questions of Blackburn's opponent, Democrat Phil Bredesen. A Facebook representative apologized to the Republican nominee and restored the ad. It is the second time an ad for Blackburn has been temporarily blocked on social media. Stay with EWTN News Nightly for comprehensive coverage in the midterm elections. We'll have reports from across the country next week as Americans head to the polls. We'll also have exclusive content on our EWTN News Nightly Facebook and Twitter pages. ISIS militants ambushed 3 buses carrying Christian pilgrims on their way to a remote desert monastery south of Cairo, Egypt. The Coptic Orthodox Church says 7 people were killed, 19 others injured. The local Islamic State affiliate claimed responsibility for the attack. Egypt's Christians account for about 10% of the country's 100 million people. They often report acts of discrimination in the Muslim-majority country. Protests in Pakistan delay the release of Catholic woman Asia Bibi. Hardline Islamists have blocked highways and set fire to dozens of vehicles, all to pressure the government to stop Bibi's release. Pakistan's Supreme Court Wednesday overturned the 2010 death conviction of Bibi on charges of blasphemy. Islamists are expected to hold nationwide rallies today after the Friday prayers. A video released today shows Turkish and American troops jointly patrolling areas around northern Syria. The 2 countries agreed on a roadmap in June as part of an agreement aimed at easing tensions between the 2 NATO allies. Turkey's defense minister said the patrols began Thursday. The Trump administration announces the reimposition of all U.S. sanctions on Iran that had been lifted under the 2015 nuclear deal. The sanctions will take effect on Monday and cover Iran's shipping, financial, and energy sectors. These are the second batch the administration has reimposed since the president withdrew from the landmark accord in May. The rollback ends U.S. participation in the nuclear deal, which now hangs in the balance as Iran no longer enjoys any relief from sanctions imposed by the world's largest economy. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says there are exceptions for food, medicine, and humanitarian services. National Security Advisor John Bolton announces new sanctions on Venezuela and Cuba. Bolton also promises additional penalties against Nicaragua as the Trump administration lays out a hardline policy towards the countries the White House bans a troika of tyranny. Bolton made the announcement during a speech yesterday in Miami. India revives a 2015 internet pornography ban blocking more than 800 porn sites. It is an attempt to deal with the country's sexual violence and harassment problems. Users and major pornography producers have already found ways around the ban. The Eiffel Tower in Paris went dark yesterday as a demonstration emphasizing the need to protect press freedom. The group Reporters Without Borders organized the protest. Cases of murdered journalists around the world were highlighted, especially the recent killing of Saudi writer Jamal Khashoggi. In commemoration of All Souls Day, Pope Francis prayed today in a cemetery for unborn children called the Garden of Angels on the outskirts of Rome.
Questo cimitero ci sono le 3 dimensioni della vita.
Francis celebrated Mass at the Laurentino Cemetery, which includes a special burial area for deceased children and unborn babies, where the Pope offered a bouquet of flowers and spent a moment in prayer. During his homily, the Holy Father told the faithful the cemetery represents the 3 dimensions of life: memory, hope, and light, to help us walk the right path. Later in the show, we'll take you to another cemetery, this time inside the Vatican, so stay tuned. Coming up, a growing social media campaign in response to the deadly synagogue shooting. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. A Jewish advocacy group is encouraging Americans of all faiths to join in observing Shabbat this weekend. The hashtag #ShowUpForShabbat is a growing social media campaign in response to last week's massacre at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. 11 people were killed in the shooting rampage. Joining me now is Alan Ronkin, Regional Director for the American Jewish Committee, the group organizing the campaign. Alan, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
What does your group hope to accomplish with this hashtag #ShowUpForShabbat?
Well, it's really two ideas at the same time. The first is to give an opportunity for people to come together, to grieve, to be together in community at this really important time. But the second is really to send a message. And that message is that we are not afraid, that we will go to our synagogues, we will go to our houses of worship, and to acknowledge that we're not alone, that we have allies in other religious communities and other faith communities who will come and join with us and stand up against this bigotry and this hatred.
Such an important message and a powerful one, too. For our audience, remind us, for those who are not familiar, what exactly Shabbat is.
Shabbat is the Jewish Sabbath, which takes place on Friday nights and on Saturdays. And not too many people know this, but Shabbat is actually the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. It comes every week, but more so than the high holidays of Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah, Shabbat is the holiest day that we have. And we come with our families, we go to our synagogues, and we take it as a day of rest and reflection. That's why it was so tragic, in fact, that this took place on our holiest day in one of our holiest spaces. It's one of the reasons it really hits us as hard as it does.
I'm sure. Why are you reaching out to the non-Jewish community?
Well, I think it's really important as Americans and as people of faith that we bring ourselves together with others who agree with us, others who support us, and to send a message, as I said earlier, that we're not alone, that we stand in solidarity, and there are people, good people all over this country who stand with us at this time of trouble.
Interfaith dialogue and cooperation is so important to so many people of faith here and all around the world.
Sure.
What can all of us do in the future as religious institutions, as people of faith, to support each other through tough times?
Well, I think the most important thing is to keep the lines of communication open, is to share with one another at times of sorrow and at times of celebration, that we're not strangers. I think sometimes in our country, you don't even know the person next door or the person down the block. And those relationships are more important than ever nowadays. And I think just opening our hearts and opening our homes to people is really the most important thing you can do.
Have you gotten any feedback so far with #ShowUpForShabbat?
Oh my God, it's been incredible. I'm blown away. We have thousands and thousands of people, elected officials, celebrities, religious leaders from all over the world, everywhere from New Zealand to Ukraine, obviously the United States and all 50 states. People have really latched onto this. And it's really breathtaking what people will do at a time of crisis and solidarity.
Incredible message, and it's an important campaign as well. I know that so many of our viewers will be praying for your community as well, and I'm sure vice versa. Alan Ronkin, Regional Director for the American Jewish Committee, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
6 months after announcing a new faith-based initiative, President Trump still hasn't named a person to lead it. Back in May, the president signed an executive order creating the Faith and Opportunity Initiative. He said the order would give faith-based organizations equal access to government funding and help protect religious liberty. Liaisons have been appointed for various administration agencies, but the White House has yet to name a director. Up next, a visit to the Vatican cemetery for an inside look on All Souls Day. And they're off. Runners in St. Peter's Square raise money for a good cause. The Mexican holiday Dia de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead, comes to an end today. The traditional celebration honors deceased loved ones through a variety of different traditions. Dia de los Muertos has deep roots with indigenous population in Mexico, with some rituals going back thousands of years during the annual maize harvest. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. Catholics around the world are marking All Souls Day by visiting the graves of their dearly departed and praying for their souls. Our Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley takes us to a little-known cemetery tucked away inside the Vatican.
Dwarfed by the grandeur of St. Peter's Basilica and measuring just 100 by 60 feet, many visitors to Rome know nothing of this cemetery's existence. The Teutonic Cemetery is the oldest German establishment in Rome. Set at the foot of the Vatican walls, it's the burial ground for German Catholics with a deep connection to the Vatican.
The cemetery today is a reminder for German Catholics of the strong ties and the long history between the Holy See and our country. When they come to Rome, many German pilgrims make a point of coming to the Vatican to visit the cemetery and pay their respects.
The privilege of being buried here is generally reserved for members of an organization founded in the mid-15th century by German officials of the Roman Curia. Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger was its best-known member before becoming Pope.
Something many people might not to be aware of is that Pope Emeritus Benedict, before he was elected Pope, used to celebrate Mass in the church by the cemetery every Thursday morning.
Inside the church, which was renovated in the 1400s, the original altar, a stone slab, is still used to this day.
In ancient Roman times, however, the spot where the cemetery now stands was known as Nero's Circus, a chariot racing ground. But as Catholics celebrate All Souls' Day, it's poignant to remember that it was also the site where many of the first Christian martyrs gave their life for the faith. At the Vatican, Juliette Lindley, EWTN News Nightly.
Thanks, Juliet, for that report. And finally tonight, the rainy weather in Rome yesterday didn't stop runners from participating in the 6th annual Race of the Saints. 6,000 runners began the race in front of St. Peter's Square. This year's competition raised awareness of victims of human trafficking in Ghana. Pope Francis, in yesterday's Angelus, wished the athletes well. It's all for a good cause. And that wraps up our newscast for tonight. We thank you for watching. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. Don't forget, we're covering the midterm elections next week with reports from some of the biggest races across the country. And we're back on Monday with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.